What if the supposedly impenetrable fortress of the Russian war machine is already collapsing from the inside out, and the world just has not noticed the massive cracks yet? From my analysis, we have reached a critical turning point, a sudden shift in momentum that could rewrite the entire fate of this global conflict overnight. Welcome to this urgent deep dive, where we uncover the hidden truths of global affairs. You have probably heard the statements before: the war began in Crimea, and it will end in Crimea. For a long time, those words felt like a distant hope, almost a cliche. But when you examine the highly classified special operations carried out by Ukrainian forces across multiple locations in just the last few days, that distant hope rapidly transforms into a cold, hard reality. We are witnessing a geopolitical chain reaction, a shockwave tearing through the supposedly safe depths of Russian territory. And the details I am about to share with you are absolutely staggering. Let us break this down step by step, starting at the 0 point of this massive geopolitical earthquake. The spark ignited in Zaporizhia. Over the last 2 weeks, a relentless counterattack has systematically dismantled the Russian defensive lines on the southern front. Dozens of villages have been completely liberated. Each fallen settlement is another removed card from a highly unstable house of cards. The Russian military spent months building layers of trenches, minefields, and anti-tank traps, universally known as the Surovikin line. Yet, the sheer force and tactical mastery of the Ukrainian advance northwest of Verbov shattered that illusion of safety. This was not just a lucky strike. It was a calculated, critical move that unlocked the entire Zaporizhia front. The pressure on Russian troops in the area reached a boiling point, leading to a rapid collapse of their local defenses. Following this, the Ukrainian army surged forward, liberating 8 more key settlements in the direction of Alexandrovsk. The elite forces pushed fiercely toward Verbov, initiating heavy, decisive clashes for the village of Kalinovsk. International monitors, satellite imagery, and on-the-ground intelligence have all corroborated these massive gains. Even the usually vocal Russian military bloggers have gone completely silent, unable to spin the undeniable visual proof of their retreating forces. We are talking about a massive territorial shift. A huge portion of a 300 square kilometer gain was achieved in this specific, highly contested area. If that number sounds familiar to you, it should. Think back to Ukraine's shocking operation into Russia's Kursk region, where hundreds of kilometers of Russian soil were captured in the blink of an eye. The Russian command structure is now experiencing that exact same nightmare, but this time it is happening in southern Ukraine, systematically bleeding their vital supply corridors dry. How did Kyiv manage to pull off this operational masterpiece? It all comes down to elite training, tactical deception, and the absolute raw power of Ukraine's air assault forces. The operation stretched all the way from Zaporizhia to Pokrovsk, turning a frozen conflict into an extremely dynamic, high-speed battlefield. Ukrainian paratroopers, specifically elite units like the 82nd and 95th Air Assault Brigades, spearheaded these high-risk missions. They were tasked with completely eliminating Russian sabotage groups and pushing the enemy far beyond the administrative borders. Despite facing intense resistance and massive enemy reserves, these paratroopers maintained a blistering operational tempo. The battlefield literally became a meat grinder for Russian armor. The gray zones, once heavily contested no man's lands, rapidly shrank as Ukrainian forces reestablished control. One of the most devastating blows I have seen came from the Spartan Brigade. Deep inside occupied territory, along a critical logistical artery used by the Russian army to funnel troops and weapons, a massive Russian military convoy was completely annihilated. The convoy, heavily modified with makeshift armor and tactical vehicles, never even reached its destination. It was caught completely exposed on the open road and turned into a mountain of burning metal. But capturing land and destroying convoys is only the tip of the iceberg. The underlying data reveals a much deeper structural collapse of the Russian military in this sector. In just 1 week, elite special forces confirmed the destruction of incredible amounts of Russian hardware. We are talking about dozens of artillery systems, multiple rocket launchers and advanced air defense arrays simply wiped off the map. Hundreds of transport vehicles, drones, and vital electronic warfare systems were completely neutralized. 4 critical ammunition depots and 4 massive fuel storage facilities went up in smoke, instantly crippling the enemy's ability to resupply. And tragically, for the Russian command, thousands of their soldiers were added to the casualty lists in this single concentrated push. The fire of freedom that started in Zaporizhia has essentially become an unstoppable wildfire, spreading rapidly to other fronts over 300 kilometers away. As the Russians scrambled to plug the massive holes in the south, the Ukrainian army struck another devastating blow in the northeast. On the Kupiansk line, the situation for Russian troops evolved from a strategic retreat into an absolute disaster. Ukrainian forces, using the natural cover of the river, managed to completely isolate and destroy an entire Russian battalion. Today, Russian control in that specific sector has evaporated. Reports indicate that only a tiny fraction of the territory remains under their grip, with a few dozen surviving soldiers trapped in ruined buildings, cut off from their command, and simply fighting to survive. The northern front is collapsing under the weight of this fierce counterattack. Drones are actively hunting down hidden ammunition depots, diving straight through the windows of camouflaged bunkers and vaporizing them instantly. The Russian army is rapidly losing its mobility, its fire support, and its strategic depth. But this tactical dominance on the ground is merely setting the stage for a much larger, much more devastating strategic shift. A shift that goes far beyond the trenches, reaching high into the skies and deep into the heart of the Russian homeland. But this tactical dominance on the ground is merely setting the stage for a much larger, much more devastating strategic shift. The operations we are seeing on the front lines are not just about reclaiming ruined villages. They are heralding a massive, coordinated push toward a much broader goal in the Donbas region. If you have been following the geopolitical chessboard closely, you know that this is where the absolute core of the conflict lies. During a highly watched global security conference recently, an ironclad determination was laid out for the world to see. Ukraine is never going to surrender the Donbas. This brutal war began in the east and in Crimea over a decade ago, and the ultimate strategy is to end it exactly where it started. This is not just political posturing. The evidence on the battlefield proves this determination is backed by lethal, calculated action. Let me paint a picture of what is happening right on the doorstep of occupied territories. Just 1 kilometer from the heavily fortified city of Donetsk, the Russian military positioned a highly advanced, multi-million-dollar Tor radar antenna. Its entire purpose was to scan the skies, blind incoming threats, and protect Russian airspace. But the system was completely outsmarted. Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles, the exact weapons the antenna was designed to destroy, hunted it down and blew it to pieces. It was a perfect metaphor for the shifting power dynamics. The hunter has officially become the hunted. And the Ukrainian armed forces did not stop there. Under the cover of darkness, multiple Russian defense strongholds near Donetsk and Mariupol were systematically dismantled. But the truly paralyzing blow came from Luhansk. An absolutely massive Russian oil depot was targeted and set ablaze, turning the night sky into a towering inferno that burned well past dawn. This was not a random target. I have analyzed the supply chains, and this specific depot was the beating heart of fuel logistics for Russia's 41st and 20th Combined Arms armies. Ukrainian defense forces orchestrated this surgical strike using incredibly precise FPV drones. The footage of the aftermath shows a terrifying chain reaction of explosions. By vaporizing this facility, Ukraine effectively severed the jugular vein of the Russian war machine in the east. This was a catastrophic financial loss running into the millions, but more importantly, it was a paralyzing tactical loss. Without fuel, Russian tank units are stripped of their mobility. They become nothing more than expensive steel coffins sitting in the mud. Without fuel, the armored vehicles cannot advance. and the artillery units lose their ability to provide continuous rolling fire support. Ukraine is no longer just holding the line and defending itself. They are actively hunting down and striking the strategic arteries that keep the Russian military alive. But here is where the story takes a truly shocking turn. The operational capabilities of the Ukrainian military are no longer restricted to their own borders or occupied territories. The psychological barrier of striking deep into the Russian homeland has been completely shattered. We are currently witnessing the most ambitious, high-stakes cross-border operations since the entire conflict began, the weapon of choice for this new phase of warfare, the devastating Flamingo cruise missile. We just witnessed the longest-range cruise missile strike of the entire war. With terrifying precision, Ukrainian forces struck the Votkinsk machine-building plant. To understand the gravity of this, you have to realize that this factory is located more than 1,400 kilometers away from the Ukrainian border. This is deep, deep inside what Russia considered absolutely impenetrable territory. The Votkinsk factory is not just a random industrial site. It is the absolute crown jewel of the Russian military-industrial complex. This is the exact facility responsible for producing the Iskander-M short-range ballistic missiles. It produces the Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missiles, and critically, it is reportedly the birthplace of the Oreshnik systems, which are known to be Putin's most prized and guarded weapons. By striking this plant, Ukraine essentially struck the very forge where Putin's hammer is made. Open source intelligence analysts have pointed out that this plant was considered so vital, so untouchable, that the Russians had dug massive trench networks and erected heavy fencing all around it. But as we have just seen, throwing dirt and chain link fences at a sophisticated cruise missile is completely useless. The Flamingo missile simply bypassed all of it. From the intelligence I am reviewing, these strikes are concrete proof of a massive hidden surge in Ukrainian weapons manufacturing. The Russian intelligence apparatus is desperately trying to locate these underground production facilities, utilizing every spy, satellite, and informant they have. But Ukraine is completely outsmarting them, solving complex engineering problems on the fly and mass producing these weapons right under Russia's nose. And the technology is rapidly evolving. They are actively improving the missile's radar signature, making it nearly invisible to Russian air defenses, and upgrading its guidance systems for pinpoint accuracy. When a weapon carrying a warhead weighing over a ton can bypass the best air defenses Russia has to offer, the entire strategic calculus of the war changes overnight. And Votkinsk was not an isolated incident. The terror from the skies continued in the Volgograd region. A massive artillery and missile directorate ammunition depot near the village of Kotluban was utterly devastated by these same missiles. The Russian occupation army used this massive complex to hoard thousands of tons of explosives, rockets, and artillery shells. The strike instantly vaporized a reinforced shelter covering over 3,600 square meters. The sheer shockwave of these attacks is sending a very clear message to the Kremlin. There is nowhere left to hide. The Russian supply chain is bleeding from 1,000 cuts, and the deep strikes are only accelerating. The cross-border operations are not just limited to deep strike cruise missiles. We are witnessing a synchronized, multi-layered assault using a variety of long-range kamikaze drones. Let us look at the Ural region. On the evening of February 20th, a massive swarm of Ukrainian drones descended upon the Pugachovka military airfield. The result was absolute devastation for Russian aviation. A Mi-8 military transport helicopter, a heavy workhorse for troop movement, and a highly advanced Ka-52 attack helicopter were completely destroyed on the tarmac. These are multi-million-dollar assets wiped out in seconds. This single calculated strike severely paralyzed the air logistics and close air support capabilities of the Russian forces operating in that specific sector. But destroying helicopters is only part of the strategy. I am tracking a much broader systematic campaign targeting the very infrastructure that keeps the Russian state functioning. Look at Belgorod. Preliminary intelligence confirms a massive strike on the Frunzenskaya electrical substation in the Dragunskaya district. Local residents captured terrifying footage of powerful explosions and a massive column of black smoke rising from the facility. The strike triggered cascading power outages, plunging surrounding settlements and the entire city of Belgorod into complete darkness. Russian air defense systems were firing frantically into the night, but they were simply overwhelmed. While they managed to neutralize a few incoming threats, the majority of the drones slammed right into their targets, instantly crippling the regional power grid. Simultaneously, the effects of a pinpoint strike on a critical chemical plant in the Tver region were captured by high-resolution satellite imagery. The biggest blow landed directly on a specialized workshop right next to the ISK Miscom company. Why does this matter? Because this specific facility is responsible for producing specialized plastic lubricants that are absolutely critical to the Russian Ministry of Defense. By taking this out, Ukraine is essentially grinding the gears of the Russian war machine to a violent halt. They are literally unplugging the power and draining the oil from the military apparatus. These successive, calculated moves are sending absolute shockwaves through the Kremlin. The front lines are crumbling, and their own sovereign territory is burning. But the absolute climax of this psychological and operational warfare was directed right at the heart of the empire, Moscow itself. In a move that stunned military analysts around the globe, Ukraine launched a staggering wave of approximately 100 unmanned aerial vehicles directly at the Russian capital. The panic was immediate and absolute. Every single major airport in the city was forced to completely suspend operations. The skies over Moscow, normally buzzing with international and domestic flights, went completely dead. A highly classified covert emergency plan was instantly activated across the capital's aviation hubs. Flights at Vnukovo, Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo, and Zhukovsky were immediately grounded, diverted, or outright canceled. Moscow's mayor frantically claimed that 25 drones had been intercepted and destroyed. But the reality on the ground told a very different story. Just 40 minutes after the initial wave breached the airspace, severe, unprecedented restrictions were slammed into place across the entire capital region. Airspace usage was locked down. Less than an hour later, the skies were completely restricted again. The capital of a global superpower was forced into a state of blind, paralyzed panic. And we must remember, this was not an isolated incident. This massive swarm is part of an escalating pattern of psychological and physical dominance. Back in January, Ukraine sustained a relentless campaign of drone attacks on the capital region for several consecutive days. At least 28 drones were confirmed shot down on January 4th alone. The day prior, the Defense Ministry reported that 29 drones breached the Moscow region's defenses. Those attacks also forced massive closures at Vnukovo, Domodedovo, and Zhukovsky airports, delaying hundreds of flights and crippling the city's logistical flow. What I am seeing here is a terrifyingly clear trajectory. Ukraine's capacity to bypass Russian radar, penetrate deep into heavily defended airspace, and strike the capital city is not just holding steady, it is exponentially increasing. The fortress has been breached, and the psychological toll on the Russian elite and the general public is immeasurable. When you take a step back and look at this entire geopolitical chessboard, the recent performance of the Ukrainian armed forces points to an irreversible turning point. The view from the high towers of the Kremlin is now crystal clear, and it is absolutely terrifying for them. They are looking at a shameful, cascading collapse of 300 square kilometers of fortified defenses in the south. They are looking at sheer despair and total annihilation confined to a few ruined buildings in the north. They are watching their most prized ballistic missile factories burning deep inside their own borders. And they are living in a capital city forced into sudden, blind lockdowns with its skies completely closed to the world. All of this raw data, all of these tactical victories point to one undeniable truth. The next major move is going to be devastating. The mental and strategic cycle of this war is reaching a critical fever pitch. The real question now is how Ukraine will deploy its final, highly trained strategic reserves. Behind closed doors, in the classified corridors of NATO, new military plans are being drawn up as we speak. The coming days could fundamentally break the back of the Russian military. What do you think is going to happen next? Is this the final collapse, or are we staring down the barrel of a massive, unseen escalation. Drop your raw take in the comments right now. I read every single one. Smash that like button if this deep dive woke you up to the reality of what is actually happening on the ground, and subscribe with notifications turned all the way on so you stay ahead of the curve.